Good morning. Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Rabbi Aaron and Evelyn Kislasi in honor of the upcoming marriage of the daughter Ilana to Joy Brescher of Los Angeles. And we're going to get right into it on Daf Ches Amud Beis at two dots, which are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines down. 13 if you go really where it starts. Ukratesim. We're going to get into the discussion of what kratesim is. So my kratesim. So Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Rabbi says name Shmuel, Yom Shetofsa Baromi Malchus. It's the day that Rome came to power, and that's what that holiday is. V'atayni, we're going to brisa. Kartesim v'Yom Shetofsa Baromi Malchus. We have a brisa that says that the holidays of the non-Jews include Kartesim and the day that the Romans seized power. Well, that means that they can't be the same thing. Amar of Yosef, Rav Yosef says, Shtei Tfisos Tofsa Romi. There were two different occasions that the Romans seized power, two different times in history that they celebrate. Achas bimei Cleopatra. One was during the days of Cleopatra,
Who's Cleopatra?
So Cleopatra was a Egyptian princess. She was the leader of the Egyptians during which year? They bring the year here. We'll see. Was.
Oh, they defeated her. It says here 31 BC.
31 BC. Thank you. That's the number I was looking for. So it's 31 BCE. So she was if looking back at history, right? The many of the Persians and all these other powers that actually the Persians had actually conquered the Egyptians. The Egyptians were already pre-conquered, but the Persians left the Egyptians to celebrate. In fact, one of the Persian rulers kept the customs and established himself as sort of the pharaoh, continuing on a lineage and dynasty. So although the Egyptians were conquered, the concept of the Egyptians still existed. To get through, you had to you basically have you have to go through Eretz Yisrael to be able to get through to Egypt on the other side from Europe. So the Roman powers first had to take over. First were in taking over all of the Middle East and Europe, and then eventually went down into Egypt as well. So when they beat Egypt, that was a big deal. So that was clear. That was who Cleopatra was, and then Achas. The other time that they won was Achas Shetofsa b'mei Yevonim was when they beat the Greeks, right? And that's when they really the one that when they beat the Greeks was actually earlier, and that was a more significant. That was the time the Romans really took over the southern European into the Middle East area where the Greeks had held power, and then later on they beat the Egyptians. So there was an earlier conquest was during the times of the Greeks. So that was when they established the two different kartesim, or the two different times they seized power. So that's why there's kartesim and then the time that they seized power. Also Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, Tlosin utrain karve avdu ramoi bahadi yavani. When the Romans were trying to beat the Greeks, they made 32 battles against the Greeks. They were unsuccessful. They weren't able to beat the Greeks and take power. Ad dishat finhu li Yisrael bahadaihu, until they made a peace agreement with the Jews. Amen. Fahacha asnu bahadaihu. This was the peace agreement that we made. Iminon malchi minaychu haparchi, iminaychu malchi minon haparchi. Whichever, either the Romans or the Jews, whoever had the king, the governors were from the other nation, and then whoever had and it would flip-flop, right? So they would switch off kings and governorships. So that was always a mixed power authority sort of a situation, and that was how it was supposed to work. So the Romans and the Jews were supposed to be in an alliance, and that was how they were going to beat the Greeks. At that point, the Romans sent a message to the Greeks. Up until this point, we've dealt fighting with you. Now let's discuss some, let's have a debate, a discussion. Margulis ve'evan tova. Let's say you've got a pearl, and let's say you've got a fine stone. So which one becomes the base if you're making a jewel, if you're making, a piece of jewelry. So which one becomes the base and which one becomes the main item?
The
gem would be the base.
So actually, the pearl is the base because the pearl is less valuable, right? The pearl is the less valuable one. So shachalu margalis, they told them the pearl is the base, right? And then the main item is going to be the mains of that is the for the Evan Tova. Evan Tova, ve'inach. So he says, what if you've got an Evan Tova and an Enoch? An Enoch is another type of precious stone that they had. Some identify it as onyx. Sounds like the word, right? Or some other kind.
Or the thing for the carbuncle.
A carbuncle. I don't know what a carbuncle is.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
Okay. Ezo mehan yasebasis lechavero. So then which one becomes the base for the other one? Evan Tova le'inach. The Evan Tova is less valuable. Therefore, the Enoch gets priority. Enoch v'Sefer Torah. And if you've got an Enoch and you've got the Sefer Torah, Ezo mehan yasebasis lechavero. Which one gets the most? Which one gets prominence? So Enoch l'Sefer Torah. The Enoch is the base for the Sefer Torah. The most valuable thing in the world is the Sefer Torah. Shachaluhu im kain. If they said if that's so, Anan Sefer Torah Gabon. We've got the Sefer Torah on our side. V'Yisrael, Bahadon, and the Jews are with it. Kafulahu Esrin V'Shis Shnin. So they beat them, and we had a peace agreement with the Romans, and it worked nicely for 26 years. And as is often the case when they established, right, the Greeks were challenging the Jews, right? So the Jews had made an alliance with the Romans in order to beat out the Greeks. And as always happens, right, the people who you make your alliance with eventually betray you. So it was 26 years that the Romans and the Jews were fine. Kamalahu behem nasaihu. They beat them, and then they kept their agreement for 26 years. Bahad the Yisrael with the Jews. Mikan ve'elach. After that, ishtabdu bahu. Then they started to attack. They started to oppress the Jews. Meikara my dorish, ulubasov my dorish. What made the Romans think one way, and what made them change their minds? Based on a pasuk, of course, because they were looking in the Torah and figuring out what they were going to do. Meikara dorish nas avenilcha ve'elcha lenegdecha. When Esav and Yaakov met each other in Parshas Vayishlach, so Yaakov says to Esav says to him, "Let's travel together, and we'll go and we'll work. We'll be able to work together. Now that we're at peace, good thing. Let's all work together." Ulavasof darish. Then they said. So at the beginning they said that's what we're supposed to do. At the end they said, "Ya'avor na Adoni lifanai avdu." Okay, so he says, then that's where Yaakov turns back and says, actually, you know what? You go ahead. I'll catch up with you. I've got things we've got. I'll be able to catch up with you. He didn't want to walk with him, and so then they said, okay, if that's the way that it works, the Romans supposed to go first. We'll take that role. And so the Romans took authority and they oppressed the Jews. Where do you get the idea that there were 26 years that? Well, I'm just going to start writing numbers down so that in case we need them. 26 years that the Romans kept their agreement. Domer of Kahana, Rav Kahana said, Keshechala Rav Yishmael Bar Yossi, when Rabbi Yishmael Bar Yossi got sick, Shalchu le Rabbi, so Rabbi sent him a message, Tell us 2 or 3 things that your father told you, right? We want to be able to preserve some of these teachings. Tell us a couple of things. Amar lahu, so he said to him, Mea ushmonim shana kodim shenechrav abayis pashta machus harashal Yisrael. Okay, so for 180 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, right? We're going to put the line, that's going to be our destruction, right? So 180 years, there were Romans. Okay, so 180 years, the Romans were in charge. And I'm going to wind up losing my place every time I turn away from, right? Pei shana ad lo charav habayis gazru tuma al eretz ha'amim ve'al klei zechuchis. So in the last time, during this 180 years, there were 80 years, right, that the Beis Hamikdash, before it was destroyed, 80 years before the destruction, during this last 100, so there's 100 years, during the last 80 years, the Chachamim added some restrictions. And they said that the land outside of Eretz Yisrael transfers Tuma, right? So we shouldn't be able to keep people from leaving Eretz Yisrael. Also, they said that glass containers also can transmit Tuma, even though the Torah says not. They had a rabbinic enactment to prevent that, to add to that. We'll discuss some of those gzeros. Mem shana ad lo charav habayis. Then, when it got to be 40 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Gol Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin left the area, the special room that they had in the Beis Hamikdash. V'yashva la b'chanos, and they sat in temporary locations. Okay, in this place the place was called Chanus, right? Is that what it is? Was that the name of the place, or is Chanus, or encampments? Either a place called Chanus, or the word lechanot means to camp. So they moved to this other place. Okay, so they moved this place.
It's a building on a Temple Mount called Chanos.
Okay, so that's where they went. So they left their proper location. Lamai Hilchasa. So what was the reason why they did that? Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, Lomar shelo danu dine knasos. They didn't judge these rules that pertained to knas anymore, right? Any of these halachic authority of the Beis Din to judge laws of knas was removed. So dine knasos salka daitach. What do you mean they didn't do any dine knasos anymore? From Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, didn't you Rav Yehuda say Rav? Baram zachor oso haish litov Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava shmo. You should remember this man Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava for good. Shel malehu, if it wasn't for him, nishtakachu dine knasos mi Yisrael. The Jewish people would have forgotten all about dine knasos. What does that mean? Nishtakachu legirsaihu. What do you mean they wouldn't have learned the Torah? I mean, they could have just read. We know the halachos of Knas. So why would it be so? Why would everybody have forgotten it because of him? If it weren't for him, Ella batlu dinei knossos mi Yisrael. Rather, what it means is they would have nullified the rulings of Knas. They wouldn't have been able to do Knas rulings anymore. Why? Shegazer malchus harashad gezerah al hasomech. The Romans made a law against people being able to give smicha to others. That kol hasomech yehareg v'chol nismach yehareg. Anybody who gave smicha would get killed. Anybody who received smicha would get killed. Ve'ir shesomchen ba techrav. The city that they would give smicha in would get destroyed. Ve'utchum shesomchen bo ya'aker. And the 2,000 amos around the city would be uprooted. Ma asa Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. What did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do? Halach v'yashav ben shnei harim gedolim. He went to the wilderness. And he went between two mountains, ubein shtei yaros gedolos, between two cities, bein beis tchumei Shabbos, more than 2,000 amos away from each, bein usha lishfaram, those I guess the two places where it was, v'samach sham chamisha zekanim, and he gave smicha to 5 elders.
But didn't they have guards all over the place?
No, not in the middle of the wilderness. But don't worry, they find out, right? They eventually do find out, but there were no guards right there in the middle of the wilderness. So who did he do? He gives smicha to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. So some pretty big names. V'Rav Avia, Mosif af Rabbi Nechemia. Rav Avia adds also Rabbi Nechemia into that mix. Kevan shekiru bahem oivim. Once the Romans find out about this, Amar lehem, he told them B'ni Rutsu, go. I told them run, right? Get out of here.
How did the Romans find out?
That's a good question. Right, must have been an informer or some kind of a thing, or like you said, lookouts or guards or sentries or something. They don't explain how they found out. Amrulo, so they said to him, Rebbe, what is going to happen to you? So Amar lehem, so he said to them, Hareni mutu lifneihem ke'even she'ein la hofchin. Look, I'm like a stone upon you. You can't turn over. Meaning, I can't run. I'm too old. I'm not going to be able to make it. So, or he was saying, I'm a stone. I'm here. I'm going to stay and stop the Romans. Amru, they said, Lo zazu misham, achinatsu legufo gimel meos lul lanios. They stabbed him with 300 spears, 300 long spears, shel barzel that were made of iron. Va'asu legufo kavra, and they made his body like a sieve. So the Romans got him. Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Lo tema. So therefore, you see that that he was still giving that he was giving smicha, and now. You needed to be able to have smicha in order to be able to judge dine knossos. That's the reason why you need it. So therefore, you see that dine knossos continued on until much later. So they wouldn't have nullified. They didn't nullify the rulings of knossos. So lo tema dine knossos. So you changed that. It wasn't that they stopped doing dine knossos when they 40 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. It was elo shelo dano dine nefashos. They stopped judging capital cases. My time. What was the reason why they stopped judging capital cases? Kevin dechozu denefishe lehu rotzchin. V'lo yachli, so lemedin amrumutav nigli mimakom lemakom ki hechidol lechayvu. What they said was, well, there are a lot of murderers, and we're not being able to figure out how to get these guys off. So it's a terrible situation. So what we're going to do is we're going to exile ourselves so we won't hear the murder cases anymore and have to kill all these murderers. So they exiled themselves to prevent themselves from having to give the death penalty. Dichsiv, as a pasuk says, "V'asisa al pia davar asher yagidulach min hamakom hahu," that you're supposed to do. They're supposed to do whatever is said from that place, meaning that the commandments of the authority of the Beis Din stems from the fact that they were in that chamber, the chamber of hewn stone, which was the Lishkas of Gazis, which was on Har HaBayis, in the Beis Hamikdash. Melamed shamakom gorim, that means that the location causes the authority. So therefore, since they left that place, they no longer had to judge. They no longer could judge cases of capital cases, and as a result of not being able to judge. Now, they could still judge knas cases because they still had smicha up until the time they lost smicha. Once they lost smicha, then they couldn't judge knas cases either. Okay, so now, we said the Romans were 180 years. Mea ushmonim vetulo, they were only 180 years. V'had tani, didn't we learn Rabbi Yossi ber Rabbi? Didn't Rabbi Yossi ber Rabbi teach as follows? Malchus pras bifnei habayis. So here's an important. Okay, yes. So the amount of time that the Beis Hamikdash stands for, according to Chazal, is going to be a total of 420 years. 420. First Beis Hamikdash 410.
Right.
70 years in between. Second Beis Hamikdash 420. So it's going to be 420. Okay, so that does not correspond in non-Jewish dates. We're going to explain why in a moment.
That's
right?
BC or BCE, the non-Jewish?
The non-Jews are in BCE, right? We're going to discuss just regular Jewish years, right? But remember, the Beis Hamikdash gets destroyed approximately the year 68, 69 or so, 70, depending on depending on the different Rishonim. But that means that most of the Beis Hamikdash, you're going to have to go back into BCEs, right? But we also have the calendar, right? So let's go like when the Jews come out of Mitzrayim 2448, right? The Beis Hamikdash is destroyed in 3889. 3889. That's our year for destruction of Beis Hamikdash. 3889. We'll need that later on or whatever from the year of creation. We're going to see there's going to be many different ways to count the years, and that's where our math comes from today. Okay, so anyway, the Romans, during this time of the second Beis Hamikdash, were Shloshim v'arba shana. Okay, there's going to be 34 years of Persians. Okay, that's during this 420-year period. Okay, the first 34 years are Persians. Then Malchus Yavan b'fnei habayis, the Greeks took over. And during the times of, this is not counting the entire Greek, the time the Greeks were in authority, but the times the Greeks had taken over Eretz Yisrael, was Mea Ushmonim Shana. They were 180 years. Okay? These are the Greeks, 180. Okay? Then we get into Malchus Chashmonai. The Chashmonaim beat the Greeks. Bifnei Habayis during the second Beis Hamikdash. Mea Ushlosh. They were 103 years. Okay, so 103 of Chashmonaim, okay, that's 103 years. And then comes Malchus Beis Hordus, the kingdom of Hordus, Herod's kingdom. He overthrew the Chashmonaim.
103 as well.
Was Mea Vishalosh, another 103. Okay. Okay, so so how many years are left here, right? If you do 103, 103 is 206. 206 and 34 brings us to 240 plus 180
It's 320.
is
320.
320.
Wait. Yeah. Is that right? 320.
What's the calculation? I can let you know.
206. I was trusting you to do it. How are you going to say it?
240
206.
420. Yeah, 420.
Okay. So
What's the calculation again? Brian, what's the calculation?
Yeah, it's 420.
326.
Yeah, it's 420.
okay, so that equals 420.
Which is how long it was, the second Beis Hamikdash.
Okay, no. Yes. Fine. So then, Malchus Hordos is maybe Shulshanim. Right, and then the base of Mikdash was destroyed, and that's the end of Malchus. Okay, Mikan ve'Elon. So from the time that Malchus, base Hordos is gone, okay, so Tzei v'Chashov Kama Shanim after Achar Churban Habayis Alma Ma'asan v'Shis Havu. So if you go back from the time, right, that the Greeks, right, remember that the Greeks and the Greeks ended here. That's when the Jews made their treaty with the Romans to get rid of the Greeks. So how many years is from here to here? 206. Okay, so this is 200. This should be 206. There should be 206 years of Roman rule, right? From the Hashmonaim essentially beat the Greeks with the help of the Romans. Okay, so therefore there should be a total of 206 years. So therefore, Alma Masan v'Shis Havu, there should be 206 years here. V'at Amart Mea Ushmonim Havu, and you say the Romans are only 180 years.
There'll be 286 altogether.
Sorry?
Between the 206 and 180?
Yeah, but we're not adding the 206 180. We're comparing 206 to 180. We're saying that 206 should be the amount of time the Romans are in charge, right? We were governors of the Romans, emperors, but in reality, the Romans were, we said before, is only 180 years. Ella, so how do you make the difference between 206 to 180? Equals 26, right? That's the 26 years, right? Ella Esrin v'Shis Shnin Kamu Behem Nosaihu. The answer is, for 26 years, the Romans weren't in charge of us. For the first 26 years here during the Chashmonayim, we were in charge of ourselves. Bahad Yisrael v'lo is shtabidu. That's when we were in peace agreement with the Romans, and they weren't authority over us. V'amtu lahachi loka chashiv lahu keshet pashta malchus harashal Yisrael. So therefore, that's why different ways to count, right? If you count who was in charge at each time, so we're going to go 34, 180, 103, 103. But if you ask how long were the evil Romans in charge, 180 years, and that's not and therefore we figured from there that the number of years that the Jews were actually okay with the Romans was 26. Okay, so that's not bad. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, now itoy haitana velo yoda proti kama hava. So now we said this brisa has an interesting ending, right? So this brisa says, right, if you want to be able to know, right, when is the end, how long it's been since the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So he says like this: if you want to know, right, if you don't know the prati kama hava, right, are not going to know the prati. Well, so let's take a number, for example, the details. So literally prati. If I have a number, 5785. That's going to be the year that we live in, right? So the number that's unnecessary here, we're going to say this number 5 is really unnecessary because it's been that way for 1,000 years and it's been that way your whole life. It never changes. So therefore, this is the klali. The big numbers are the klali. These numbers are the details. We're actually going to, so therefore, when we say the year is Tuf Shin Pei Hey, Tuf Shin, draw nicely, Tuf Shin Pei Hey, right? Tuf is 400, Shin is 300, Pei is 80, and Hey is 5. If you add that up, really Tuf Shin Pei Hey just is 785. We don't ever write the 5,000, because that's obvious, right? So we just tell what year is it? 785. Okay. So similarly, if you were going to be writing contracts for a living and putting dates into contracts, you never really have to worry about the hundreds. What century is it, right? You don't ask people what century is it, right? Even if you're going to mess up your bank checks, right? You're not going to write the wrong century, right? So we do need to be able to figure out the prate, which are the tens and the ones, the numbers in the tens and the ones places. That's what we're going to be talking about. The prate are the numbers in the tens and the ones places. The klali are the centuries in the hundreds places and beyond. Gotcha. Okay, so therefore, if we want to know, right? Let's say you lose track, right? If you make a mistake and you don't know how many years are the right? You don't know what's the number of years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So lishaylei l'safra, you should go to a sofer, okay, and you should ask him, kama ksiv, what year are you writing in your contracts? Because the Greeks, the Sophrim, the scribes, used in contracts the year since the kingship of the Greeks, from the time that the Greeks took authority and power, and they never stopped counting from that date. Okay. Now there's going to be a 6-year discrepancy, just to be able to know our history a little bit. The Greeks, before they came into Eretz Yisrael, were in Elam, and then after they were in Elam, they spread out all throughout the world 6 years later. And so there's 2 different times to calculate where the Greek rule starts from. We start counting this Sofer time counts from when they spread their rule throughout the world. Okay. So now, here's what you need to do. Right, so you should find out when the Sofer says v'nitfe alayhu esrin shnin, and then you should add 20 years umishkach lei lechumrei, and then you'll find your calculation. Right, that you'll be able to know how many years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, because 20 years because. When did the Greeks, when are we counting from? In a second.
I think from the beginning of the Greek Empire, if I remember.
Yes, but I don't know if you want to make sure. Maybe I should just, Shana Esrim. Because I've Gittin the Steinmacher. Because Yavon. Where we're going to see later on. One sec, where's the 20 come from? 206.
I think it's when they actually feel like the Greeks started ruling. There was like that gap between when the Greeks actually took over.
No, there's because the Greeks there's I'm trying to be able to find where it is. It's not in the notes here, but can I borrow your Gemara for a moment? Because I know that it was here in the notes down here. But he tells you that the Greeks took over. Right. Here we are. Okay, yes. The count used is 380 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. The Greeks took over 40, that's what it is. Okay, thank you. That's where the 6 comes from. Okay, so we said the Greeks start here at 180. The Persians are 34. Okay. There are 6 additional years once the Greeks, we start counting where the Greeks start existing, but it's actually 6 years into the Greek era that we start counting shtaros, because the Greeks actually took over here plus 6. So it's 34 plus 6. So that means that at year 40 of this era is when we started counting contracts, which means that there's 380 years between the between the contract date to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so that's what we know, right? The Greeks, there's 300. From this time, 6 years after the Persians, 6 years into the Greeks, they take authority enough that we celebrate that the Greeks took authority, and therefore there's 380 years. So now, if you want to know how many years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, so let's say somebody tells you it's 5. This is the year 526 of contracts, right? Contracts. So what I've got to do is I've got to add 20 to this number, and this 500 doesn't matter, right? There's 300 because there's 300 years difference. Then I'm going to know that it's 206 years after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Or 246 years. 246 years after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because I know there's always going to be 300 years difference, but it's 380. Do I do it right? No, it should be 146 years, right? That's 146. Because this is 146 plus 380 equals 526. Okay? Since I don't care about the hundreds, because I always know how many hundreds of years have already gone by between now and the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, I'm really just worried about this year. The answer is it's always going to be 20 off. So what I do is I add.
Cipher or that I forget.
So I go from. That's if the Tan. If you want to know when the destruction. If I know the Sofer date, and I need to know the date, and I want to know the date of how many years till the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, I add 20, and then I get the correct end number.
Wait again. Why do we add 20 again? I forgot. It's not 6. It's 20.
It's 20 because I'm going to add 20. Because if I added 20 to here, I'd get an exact 0, right? I'd get it. So therefore, in order to be able to know the difference between the 10s and the 1s between the two counts, I add 20.
Okay.
Right? That's basically where it comes from. And Itoy Safra, if it goes the other way, let's say you have a sofer who doesn't remember when his dates are, right? So Nishayle Latana Kamachoshev, he should ask a Tana, who is counting the number of years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, v'nivtzar minayu esrun shinen, and he should subtract 20 years, right? Because if you were to go from this number to this number, you're going to subtract 20 from 46 back to 26, okay? And umishkach le lechumrei, and then that is going to get your calculation properly. V'simanech, and the way to remember whether you're supposed to add or subtract is betzira tana tosva. Safra betzira, the sofer is writing less, and the Tana Tosfa, and the Tana is more. So you always add to get to the year of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, you subtract to get to the year of contracts. Okay? So again, just to be able to make sure that we understood what we did there, right? It was complicated and I was trying to figure it out as we go. But essentially, there's 380 years during the time the Beis Hamikdash was around that we started counting contracts. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, we're going to see. In Chutz La'aretz, they just kept the same count and they kept on going, starting from when the Greeks took authority, when all their contracts stayed the same, okay? In Eretz Yisrael, it's true they started counting contracts from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. However, in Chutz La'aretz, that count from the Greeks maintained. What happens is somebody might want to calculate how many years from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash we are. We don't really care about how many hundreds of years it's been because we can keep in our mind how many hundreds of years it's been. But I want to be able to know what exactly is the, as we say, the prote, the tens and the ones place. What's the number difference? Since there's 380 years difference between one date and the other, the difference, if I was going to get to the proper date, is to add 20. Because if I take the year, because if I take the year 526, if I add 80, add 20 to 26, I get 46. And this 146 is how many years since the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash the year 526 is. How do you check that? There should be 380. If 146 plus 380 equals 526, that's how you know you're right. Okay, so that's just a quick math boost, right? If you want to be able to know, if you want to subtract 380, just add 20 to the tens place, right? Whenever you're going to subtract a number, if you have a number 86, right, and you want to know what's going to come out in your, if you have 686 and you want to know what number is going to come out in your tens and ones place, add 20, you get to 06. 06 is going to be the number the number in the tens and ones place you're going to get if you subtract 80, right? Okay, good. So that's the math. Now, we have a couple more.
But it makes sense. It's 80 and 20. It's 100. So
that's exactly right. It makes good sense.
It's either
correct.
Going down
Rabbi, we need Rory Moskowitz here to help us out.
Yeah, so there you go. Tana debei Eliyahu. So we have a brisa from the yeshiva of Eliyahu. Sheishes alofim shana havim ha'olam. This world is going to last 6,000 years. Now, I should point out, and I wonder if this is why this is being brought here right now. The historical, if you look in a history book that's not a Jewish history book, the number of years of the Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash, is much longer. One of the reasons why is this 34 years of the Persian rule is a very controversial number. If you look, the Persians kept history, right, as it says in the Megillah. If you want to know the rest of the kings, it even says it. Our Chazal tell us, if you want to know the rest of the kings, look in the Malchus Paras and Madai. Look in the rule, because the Chachamim don't calculate them. From the time of Koresh, who was the one who originally set to start building the second Beis Hamikdash, and Daryavesh, who continues it, they count 34 years. But there were 13 or 14 Persian kings, and it actually lasts about 169 years or so, or longer, 100 to over 200 years. So there's 169 years missing from the Persians in the Jewish calendar, and that is subject, if you want to find some topic of discussion that has hundreds of different theories. So that those missing years of the Persian rule during the second Beis Hamikdash is one. It sounds like the Chachamim really intentionally changed the date of how long the second Beis Hamikdash was around to 420 years in order to meet up with a nevuah, to match a nevuah that was in Daniel that talks about 7 weeks of 70 years. So therefore you have the 420 years plus the 70 years of exile is 490 years, and they really wanted to line it up with that time. Other theories include that we're 169 years off in our calculation, as we're going to see right now. Tana de Be'elio tells us the whole world is going to last 6,000 years. Well, if you know when 6,000 years is going to end, so people will be like, Mashiach's coming anyway, right? So therefore, they wanted to pretend for 169 years. That's a good theory also. There's lots of good theories and discussions about where these years went. But what we do know is they disappeared, right? So if you take a look historically, right? So I was like, you're going to say, well, the Chazal tell us the second Beis Hamikdash lasted for 420 years. And the historians say a different thing. We shouldn't pay attention to the historians. The reality is that the historians make a really good point, and the Jews, it seems almost like the hint in the Megillah is, yes, we're intentionally not including all of the Persian kings. And if you really want to know about them, go look in their Sfarim, because we're not including them in our counts, and we're eliminating all these Persian rulers during the beginning of for a couple hundred years of the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. So
5 years left.
Yep. So therefore, right? We're not at 5. I think we're at 50 something years left or something.
5786 plus 169.
Yeah, it is
5955.
5955. So that's 45 years left.
Oh yeah, sorry. I thought I said 5995. Sorry.
So that's where you have to hold out, right? Be strong, eat healthy. Okay.
I could make it.
Yep.
Okay. So just pointing this out, when you get this 420 years, stuff you won't hear in another Daf Yomi. Okay. Tana de Be'elio, that in the Brady Bunch. Tana de Be'elio, Sheishas Alafim, 6,000 years, Shana Haveolam, that's how long the world's going to last. Shnei Alafim Tohu, the first 2,000 years is emptiness and void. Shnei Alafim, second 2,000 years is Torah, right? Avram Avinu was born in 1,000, the year from creation, 1,948. And when he's 52, discovers Hashem is around. He discovers it when he was earlier, but he starts going around spreading Torah. So from that time, that is the era of Torah. Shnei Alafim, the last 2,000 years is Yemos HaMashiach. That is the time when Mashiach is supposed to come, the year 4,000, right? Okay, so now we're going to discuss how from the end of the Beis Hamikdash to the era of Mashiach, how long is that supposed to be? Ba'avonosenu sherabu, since we have too many averos, yatzu mehen masha yatzu, we've already lost some of that Mashiach time, right? Mashiach could have come at year 4,000 and on. Mehen shnei alafim Torah me'emos. So, Masha yatzu mehen. Shnei alafim Torah me'emos. When were the 2,000 years of Torah? In nema mimatan Torah ad hashta, if you're going to say that is from Matan Torah, from the time of Matan Torah ad hashta leka kulei. So he says, well, then you don't have 2,000 years, right? From the Torah was given in 2448, right? In year 2448. So, if you look into it, Trei Alafe, it's going to be 2,000 years, Prate Dehai Alpha Hu Dehavai. So he says, it's going to be 2,000 years, it's going to be 448 years. Right, it's going to be that are going to be. He says Shnei Alfei Shanim. He says El Prate Dehai Alpha Hu Dehavai. There's years that are taken off, which is going to be 400 and, as we said, 448 years that are missing from that 2,000 years, because the Matan Torah was given in 2448 from Brias Ha'olam, so we've lost 448 years. So rather, when does it start? From when Avram Avinu starts going around trying to convert people in Haran. We have a tradition that Avram was 52 years old at that time, right? And he was born in 1948 plus 52. So therefore, Chamishin Betartin Hava. Kama Batzran. Midatani Tana. So how many years are you going to miss from the 2000, right, that he missed? It's Arba Me'av Arba'im V'Timnaya Shnin Havyon. We said there were 448 years missing, right? Kimayas Bay, when you do the math, so from the back to the year, Mehanefesh Asher Asu B'Charan, from back to the years of when Avram was going in Charan, so then Ad Matan Torah, until Matan Torah is Arba Me'av Arba'im T'naya Shnin Havyon. It's 448 years, right? You can work your way backwards. We know that Avram was 70 at the Bris Bein Abesarim, and that was 430 years before they were released from Mitzrayim. So therefore, you work your way back 430 years plus that. Sorry, that's from the time they were. That's 430 is Bris Bein Abesarim. 400 from when Yitzchak was born. Yitzchak was born in 20 when Avram was 100. Right, 20 in the year 2048, right? So we can work our way backwards 48 years from there to when he was 52. So there's different ways of calculating, but the bottom line is the year 2000 is when Avram is 52, and it all works out. Okay, so Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa says, right? Let's say you want to know. When is you're counting from the Yemos HaMashiach times, okay? So we said there's 172 years. I don't think I'm giving anything away yet, but we said 38. What was it? 38, what was the year? 4,000 minus 172? What's 4,000 minus 172?
4,000 what?
3,728.
3,700.
Yeah, 828.
3828. Good. So that's perfect. So the year 3828 from creation is the year of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, and you can add all that up by adding up the 420 plus the 410 plus the 70 in between plus the 1,000 years that they were that they had that they didn't have the Beis Hamikdash. You add it up and it gets us into 3828. Okay, there's 172 years between the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and the year 4000. Okay? So, Rav Papa says, right, if you want to be able to know how many years from the year 4000 you are, let's say you're calculating how many years of Mashiach we've lost, right? So then, Lishayle L'Safra Kamaksiv. So go to a scribe and find out, ask him, V'nitfe alayu arboin v'tamni. And what you're going to need to do is you're going to add 48 years on to him, and that's going to get you to your calculation. Why? Because, right, you're going to wind up. He's calculating based on 380 years before the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, you're calculating 172 years after that. So therefore, 380 plus 172 is 552, right? You're 552 years off from each other in your calculation. We don't care about the hundreds. We care about this number 52 because we're trying to be able, because we already know the hundreds. We already know how many hundreds of years since 4,000 because like we said, that number never changes. It's this 52 we're worried about, right? This number again, 52 is 172 plus 380. That we got from here. I keep saying there, it's there, right? So that gives us 552. So if I want to be able to know if I want to be able to add, if I want to be able to get back to so what I do is, in order to get to 52, I'm going to add 48, same strategy, the number that I need in order to get to 100, to add on to the scribe number in order to get to the number of detailed years, right? And plus we're going to know that it might be 1 or 2 centuries off aside from that. Right, in order to be able to separate it. So if I was at the year 172, for example, okay, and I wanted to be able to know how many years, let's say I had, let's do it in the nice way, 162. If I'm calculating here from 180, let's say they're at the year, we don't have to be before the Beis Hamikdash. If I was at the year 552, exactly, right? So if I added 48 to this, right, I'd get to 00, which is the actual year 4000. It would be 6. We would know that it's 600 years, right? Well, this would be the year 00. 552 is actually the year 0 at the beginning of the Mashiach era, at the beginning of the Mashiach era, right? If I was in the year 652, 752, so then I just remember that I am at the year 100 or the year 200, right? But in order for me to remember the zeros, I just take whatever number the sofer is counting and I add 48 to it. Good?
Okay.
Okay. So therefore, Visima and the other way, so Visimanech, the way that you will remember it, Tessam and Beis, are Boim Ushmona Ir, there are 48 Levi cities. Now, the Levi cities don't have much to do with the structure of the Beis Hamikdash or the Mashiach times. It's just that there's a pasuk that has the number 48 in it. So you remember, 48 is a difficult number to remember. So if you want to remember your number 48, that's a good way to remember it. V'itoi Safra, let's say the sofer forgets what year he's supposed to count. Nishayle Latana, find a Tana and ask Kama Katani V'nivtzar Minahu, how many years since the beginning of the Mashiach era, what year, or you can even ask what year of creation is it, right? You can even use the years of creation at that point because it's the same thing, right? So therefore, V'nivtzar Minahu Arba Mishmona, subtract 48 from it. Okay? Umeshkach le lichumre, you'll find your calculation. V'simanech safra betzira tana tosva. That's we use the same thing. You're going to remove the numbers in order to get to the sofer's number, and you're going to add on in order to get to the tana's number. Okay, good. Amar Rav Huna, braid Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, says, "Hayman delo yoda kama shnei b'shavua." Let's say you don't know what shemitah year you're in. Okay, so now nitve chad shata v'nechshuv kloli. The Yovle, so he says, here's what you got to do. So if you are in, so let's erase all this, right? We got all this. We're up to Shemitah year issues, okay? So now, right, first you're going to need to know how many hundreds of years you are from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, okay? So, you're going to first add 1 year to the number of years to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because the year before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash traditionally was a Shemitah year. Okay? So therefore, you're going to add 1 year onto that. So that will give you that will set you up to start off. That's your calibration year. So add 1 first. Okay? So then, after you add year, v'nichshav klali b'yovle. Count how many centuries you have. So let's say you're going to be, we're going to say that you are 318 years after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So number 1, add 1. So you're at 319. Number 2, take this number 3. You're going to recognize that for every 100 years, there's 2 sets of 49 in that year, right? So that's a full set of Shemitahs. You don't have to calculate those. Those are perfectly divisible by 7. But there's a remainder of 2. Correct? So it's 2 extra days. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this 300, you're going to take the hundreds, okay? You're going to multiply it by 2 for 2 days each 100 years, and you're going to add it to this number. So you're going to add 6 to the 19. That's going to give you 25. Okay? Now that you're at 25, okay, I'm going to give it away, right? You're going to divide this by 7, and that's going to tell you that it is 3 Shemitah years with a remainder of 4. The remainder of 4 tells you what year of the Shemitah cycle you're in. Okay? That's a great way to know. Because basically what we're doing is we're seeing you could divide 318 by 7 also. That's the way we would do it, right? But this is a nicer way because they take this and they're teaching you how to divide the hundreds and do the whole thing out quicker, right? That's a quick mental math trick in order to be able to divide a number by 7. Okay? So that is what they're suggesting that you do. We're not going to have time to discuss. What we're going to do is tomorrow night's shiur, I'll start off by pointing out that the Shemitah years don't align with modern Shemitah years. And there's a couple of, I'll be able to mention just quickly, right? That the reason why this isn't going to line up, it's going to be 2 years off from the Shemitah cycle that we have. And there are a couple of reasons why. Number 1 reason has to do with whether you're going to count the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash the year after, so you might be a year off by 1 over there. The other issue is how you count the years from creation as well, might be an issue as well, because we're counting years from creation right now. And that is that when the world was created, and then there were 6 days, and then Adam Harishon was created. On the day Adam Harishon was created, is that year 1 or is that year 2? Right? So we count it should be year 2. Because basically year 1 was the 6 days of the 5 days of creation before Adam Harishon. So therefore, we may be off by a year of counting from the way they counted during the times of the Beis Hamikdash as well. In any event, it accounts, the Rishonim argue this and discuss how to account for the fact that our calculation according to the way we're doing it, doesn't fit, because if you count the years from the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Shemitah years are off by a couple of years from where we are today. And the answer is it's because of various different calculation methods that we have as well. So that's just a quick side point. I can go into it in much more detail, but we don't have much time for it. So and there's a lack of concern for that matter in any event. So let's say, so if you want to be able to go to Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna says, you don't know what Shemitah you're in, Nitve Chad Shata, so then V'nichshov Kloli, so what you should do is add 1 year, calculate your centuries b'yovle, and count the number of yovels in each of those. Uprote b'shvue, and then you're going to count the tens and the ones by dividing by 7. V'nishkal mimea trey. So when you take out the 100s, you're going to have a remainder of 2. V'nishte aprote, and put that into the tens and the ones. V'nachshavinhu leprote b'shvue, and then calculate, divide by 7. V'yada kama shnei b'shvua, and you'll remember what year in the Shemitah cycle you are. V'simanech, and the way to remember that is kizesh nasaim hara'av. This was the 2 years of the famine. And again, you'll remember the years of 2 with the remainder of 2 that you have to calculate over and send over to the tens and ones place. Bekar Varetz. So Amar Rabbi Chanina says, Amar Achar Arba Me'os L'Churban Habayis. If after 400 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, right? So we're looking at 400 plus 38, well, we said 38, I can't remember, 3880, what was 172? 4,000 minus 172 was 3828, right? Yeah. 3828. 400 years after that, okay? Somebody says to you, do you want to buy a 4,000 dinar field for just 1 dinar? Lo tikach, don't buy it, because it's not worth it, right? Don't buy land in Chutzlar. It's totally not worth it, because Mashiach's coming, and you're going to have to get rid of it real fast, and you're going to lose. Right? So Tana Achar, so we learned, so then Tana Achar, another Tana says, Arbas alafim umasayim ushloshim va'achas shana lebrias olam. That if you're, that really, he says it's the year 4,321 years. 4,231, right, from the creation of the world. Now in Tomar Lach Adam Kachos Sadeh Shavik Elef Dinarim B'Dinar. He says it's worth 1,000 dinars. Don't buy it for 1 dinar. Al Tikach. Maybe what's the difference between the two of them? The answer is if you did the math out and you calculated it out, it would be Ikabeinayu Tlushin, it would be 3 years off from each other. Because if you're just going to add 400 plus 3828 versus, right, that's going to get you to 4,228 versus 4,231, and you're going to be 3 years off from each other, right? So we know that. Right, so Demasnisa Tafya Tlushni, because this one teacher, the Mishnah is teaching, the Bryce is teaching is 3 years more. 4231 is 3 years later than 4228, which is in the other one. Okay, Ahushtara Dehava Ksiv Bay Shishnin Yeserta. There was once a contract that came, and it had 6 years later, meaning this was the year. Let's say it was year 500 since the Greeks started counting. And so we're supposed to be counting that shtar. This year is that 500th year. Comes the contract, and the contract says this loan took place in the 506th year. So they didn't know what to do with this contract because it has the wrong date on it clearly. It's like getting a contract right now that's dated 2031. 2031 hasn't happened yet. So what are you supposed to do with that contract?
Travel was
not invented. So Savar Rabbanan Kami Derav Lemeimar. So the Rabbanan thought in front of Rav to say, Hi Shtar Meuchar, it's just a post-dated contract. It's a post-dated contract. So what do you do with a post-dated check? It's not a void check, it's post-dated. So what do you do with it? Niavde ad dematya zamne. Put it aside until the time comes. Velo tarif, and you can't collect any mortgaged properties that were sold before that date. Because like the contract was written initially at that date. And so therefore at that date, the contract becomes collectible. Amar Rav Nachman says, Hi Safra Dukna Kasvei. He says, I know the Sofer. The Sofer is a very meticulous person. He doesn't make mistakes and post-date a contract for 6 years. V'hanach shishnin demachu be'elam. Those 6 years that the Greeks were in Elam, those are the 6 years that he counted, right? So remember we said that there were 34 years of the Persians and then the Greeks took over. He actually started his count at 34 rather than waiting till 40. And so that's why his date is 6 years. his date is actually 6 more years than everybody else's. So therefore, this ubizmane kasve, this contract is dated the right date. It's today. So this is correct. Detanya, we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Yossi says, Sheish shanim malchu be'elam, there's 6 years that the Greeks were in Elam, ve'achar kach pashta malchusan becholam kulo, and then all the malchus went around in the whole world. So therefore, it's a correctly dated contract, not a post-dated contract. Maskif lo Rav Acha bar Yaakov, while we're waiting for, unless we want to start putting tefillin on.
It's up to you.
Let's do another till the next 2 dots. Okay, because they're fun now. Maskif, there's no more math. No more math. Everybody can relax. Okay. Maskif lo Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Rav Acha bar Yaakov asked the following question: how do we know that we're going to date contracts from this Greek era? Right? It's a weird thing we're still dating our contracts from the Greek era. Dilma li'etzias Mitzrayim maninan. Maybe this contract was dated from the time that they went out of Mitzrayim. Right, Vishavkel alpha kama, and therefore that's why if you figure it in, from the time 34 years after the construction of the Beis Hamikdash plus 1,000, right, you're going to wind up at the same date. So therefore this contract that says 506, maybe he's not counting from the Greek time at all. Maybe he's counting from the time that they left Mitzrayim, and v'nakte alpha. So therefore, v'shavke alpha kama v'nakte alpha basra. He's not counting centuries, obviously, in his contract, because there's no point, right? We don't need to write in our contracts 5785. We're just going to write tafshin pei, which is 785. We leave the thousands out. Okay, v'hai me'ucharhu, which means that this is a post-dated contract because it's not 1,500 and 1,506 years after the time we left Mitzrayim. It's only 1,500 years after. Therefore, this is a post-dated contract. And why not go back to the post-dated contract? Amar Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman said that is not a option because begola ein monin ela malchi yavonim bilvad. In exile, the contracts are always dated from the times of the Greek ascendancy. So even though there are other meaningful times to be able to count your contracts from, people don't. So he thought that he was just pushing him away. Right? In other words, he had no proof of that. He just says, nah, we don't do that. Okay, so he thought he was just being pushed off. Okay, Nofak dak, so he went out and he investigated it. Ve'ashkach, and he found, Detanya in a brisa, it says, Begola, he says actually a brisa, that in exile, ein monin elo malchi yavonim bilvad, we only write contracts, it's a halacha, in a brisa, that says we only write contracts using the Greek kings. Amar Ravina says, Masnisin Nami Daika, you can even see it in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah in Maseches Rosh Hashanah. In Rosh Hashanah it says, Be'echad b'Nisan Rosh Hashanah Malachim, the first of Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah for kings. Regalim, for the holidays, Ve'amrinon, and we said, L'malachim l'mayhilchos, so why do you mean the kings? For what? For what purpose do the kings? Does it matter when the kings are? Amar Rav Chisda says, Lishtaros. It's for contracts. Utnan, and we learned about that, Be'echad b'Tishrei Rosh Hashanah Lishanim, that the first of Tishrei is to count years, ulashmitin, and for the Shemitah years. V'amrinon l'shanim l'mayachsam. We said, what do you mean by years? V'amar Rav Chisda explained lishtaros, for contracts. So kasha shtaros ahadadi. So which is it? Contracts are going by the first of Nisan to the year add, or is it the first of Tishrei? Umishaninon, and we learned over there, Meseches Rosh Hashanah, Kan l'malchei Yisrael, Kan l'malchei Ovdei Kochavim. It depends on whether you're counting using Jewish kings, which is what they did in Eretz Yisrael. Every time they knew a new Jewish king, they would start over and they would go by the first of Nisan. And then the other is the kings of the non-Jews, which is the Greek era, which is how they were counting. L'malchei Ovdei Kochavim mitishrei maninon, for the non-Jewish kings, i.e. the Greek kings, which they were using in Chutz La'aretz, that was from Tishrei, would be the next year. L'malchei Yisrael, and when it comes to the Jewish kings, mi Nisan maninan. V'anon, and now Hasha mi Tishrei maninan. So we in Chutz La'aretz, we count from Tishrei, right? Because we're counting from the Greeks. Now, if you're going to say that we're counting Yitzias Mitzrayim, mi Nisan ba'inan lemimne, so then why would we not be counting years from Nisan? Why are we switching the year at Tishrei? It's clear that we're using the Greek kings as our years that we're counting from Shema Mina. Okay, so that's where we will pause. We have good stuff about the Yom Genusia coming up. We'll discuss tomorrow.